bagpipes mean one thing here in the inner sunset in San Francisco, California. It's time for Derfcast, episode 40. I want to thank last week's guest, Bob, for Bob's Radio Cafeteria. You can listen to Derfcast at Facebook. Type all upper letters, uppercast, whatever, upper letters at Derfcast at Facebook.com. You can also listen to us now on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network on iTunes. And you can always listen to the show on SoundCloud. Just type in Derfcast, all caps, press the heart button after you've listened to the show, and there you go. I'm joined this week by my security guard, Max the cat, who's sleeping by his bowl, like he usually does at this time in the afternoon, and my engineer. Without her, nothing would be possible, Pipes the cat. And this week, have I got a great guest. This man is a best-selling author of books on Ric Flair, Billy, Superstar Graham, Freddie, Blassie, and the yet-to-be unpublished book on the Iron Sheik, Keith Elliot Greenberg. Welcome to the show, Keith, and thank you so much for putting up with my ridiculous opening monologue.
I enjoyed it, Fred.
Thanks. I try and be different than anybody else because that's kind of like my homage to Roddy Piper. I am who I am. And
I am very impressed that your engineer goes by the name Pipes as well.
She's a great point, Golden Point Siamese, and when I got her, the very first place in the house she went to was a little shrine I have for Roddy Piper with his pictures and cardboard cutouts, and she just fell asleep right at the foot of the cardboard cutout. So I had to name her Pipes. Perfect name.
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, perfect name. How are you doing today, Keith?
Good. This is very exciting for me because I'm as curious about information you have as you might be about information I have, given that you grew up watching Portland wrestling and San Francisco wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
I remember as a kid, and I think we might have discussed this when we previously met, trying to find UHF signals to discover some wrestling territory that I wasn't normally exposed to.
God,
so I'm full of questions about Portland and San Francisco.
Oh, God, I hope I have the answers. I mean, you are a real historian, and you've made a living at it, made some money, and written a couple of great books, Ric Flair, Freddie, Blassie, Billy, Superstar Graham. I think I've read that book 3 times, and I've read the Blassie book 3 times. Amazing job on all 3 of those. And you've also written a book on the Iron Sheik, you said.
I did, and that's an interesting tale. I was assigned that project. Actually, I was given the assignment in 2008, and the reason I remember that so vividly is that I remember being in the Iron Sheik's apartment. At the time, he was estranged from his family, and we were in his apartment outside Atlanta watching the Democratic Convention together while we were working on the book. And then I finished that book in 2009, but at the time, I believe there was the Iron Sheik was still battling substance abuse issues at that point. And right. I think both from the publisher's end, and it was a WWE imprint from WWE's end, they couldn't really put out a book where the ending had him crying because his cable was being disconnected and he couldn't watch the Olympics. Subsequently, I did a story about him for Playboy and spoke about his recovery from drugs and how he reconnected with his family, reconciled with his wife, and was living a very peaceful, domestic life now. And WWE reached out to me again at that point, and they said, hey, why don't you redo the book? So I did, and when the book was redone, I received the news that, he's no longer a substance abuser, and he's living a nice life now, but some of his stories just seem so out there that there was a squeamishness about whether they wanted to release it and have all his old drug stories and some of his rants that are always politically correct.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you don't know what he's going to say except his usual jabroni, I'm the king, I'll do this. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to start talking about that. But
that said, there's a depth to the man. And that was my most disappointing thing about the book being published, is that there is a depth to the Iron Sheik, and people don't realize that he's a real athlete. Now, those gold medals he would show, they were not Olympic gold medals, but they were AAU gold medals. He did win the gold medal in the AAU. And, he competed in the Pan Am Games and twice was an assistant coach on the U.S. Olympic wrestling team in 72 and 76. So, and he engaged in shoots with Lou Thesz and Danny Hodge and Paul Gotch. And, Austin would get the better of those guys because of his type of background. So I kind of wanted the public to know this was Khosrow Vaziri. This was the real athlete, and that is a shoot, not a work.
I firmly have heard the same stories, and Lou Thesz was taken back by how good he was. And I guess Vern Gagne saw that in him, when he trained him. And when the internet first came into play and people started publishing stories, one of the very first wrestling stories I read on the net was that Vern did indeed offer him $50,000 or whatever it was to break Hogan's leg and ruin WrestleMania.
Right. Well, it wasn't ruined WrestleMania. It would have ruined Hogan's anointing as then WWF champion.
Right, before WrestleMania. I stand corrected.
Right, that would have been an early before, because Backlund lost to the Sheik in December of 83. And I remember one of my best friends is Keiji Nakayama, who is, to this day, a photographer for one of the Japanese weekly wrestling magazines. And after Backlund was defeated by the Sheik, Cage and I went up to the Sheik's hotel room, and I interviewed him. That was before I was on retainer for WWE. I started writing for their magazines in 85. This was 83, and I was writing a wrestling column for the Staten Island Advance. So we went to the Sheik's hotel room, and Cage took some pictures, and I interviewed him and chatted with his wife, on the night he won the title. And then Cage and I went out to a bar called the Savoy, which was a hangout for a lot of the wrestlers after the show at Madison Square Garden. And we were talking with these fans, and one fan said, I heard next month Hulk Hogan's going to come in and beat the Sheik for the belt. And Cage and I said, what a mark. Everybody knows that Hulk Hogan's in the AWA. That's impossible. So shows how much we knew.
I wonder how that fan found out.
You know what? I mean, it's interesting because that was a pre-internet era.
Right.
So maybe there were folks who knew a wrestler, or maybe somebody knew somebody who worked in the dressing room. Maybe somebody knew a security guard at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
Told a friend who told a friend. I don't really know.
Well, remember that's when Vince would have that big calendar and would have everything to the exact date written down when Backlund was going to beat Superstar and so on and so forth. Yeah, like you said.
Senior.
The senior.
Yeah.
But at that point, Junior had taken over for his father. So.
Right.
And so the Sheik became a transitional champion. But I envy you because being on the East Coast, Keith, you almost had as much wrestling here, if not more, than I did growing up. Boy, that didn't make sense. That didn't come out right.
I know what you're saying. You're saying exposed to more territory.
Right.
Because in reality, like I remember having a talk with Jim Cornette, and Jim Cornette told me that he lived out in the middle of the country in outside Kentucky, outside Louisville, Kentucky, and that his family had a trailer, and he put this giant antenna on top of the trailer. It was larger than the trailer, and he was able to pick up wrestling from all over the country.
Wow. That makes sense.
I could relate to that because I remember actually having a dream that I could watch the AWA on television. That's how obsessed I was with finding out about other territories.
You and I grew up the same way. When there was nothing on Saturday night, I had a wire leading to my roof, leading to the neighbor's antenna, just a bare copper wire. I didn't know anything about electronics. I just guessed that's how it was. And I tripled my reception, basically. And like I told you before, I got the UWF one time. And, excuse me, I'm so wrong. I got a channel that had the Spanish network. So I had Mike LaBelle. Yeah, Mike LaBelle. And when I went up to Portland, Oregon, Pendleton, Oregon, to stay up with, excuse me, God, am I tongue-twisted or what today, Keith? When I went to Portland, you did it again, Pendleton, Oregon, to stay with my aunt for the summer, I was privy to Portland wrestling, which, you said you wanted to find out about, which was amazing. And,
What was that like watching Portland wrestling during that era?
Portland wrestling was, was keyed or was more presented to the public as any other wrestling show I've ever seen. It was down home. The announcers spoke to the fans like they mattered, like they cared. And the angles were once a week. And if you were able to go to the Rose Garden and see the tapings, you felt like you were family. I went to one Portland taping, and then I went to the Pendleton Armory and Eugene for matches. And you just felt like they were your wrestlers. I can't really explain it. Maybe by watching on YouTube, you could see the difference between maybe Roy Shire's promotion or LaBelle's. But Oregon, I guess the announcers just spoke to you different. It just appealed. The wrestlers, too. They were more, in other words, it was more of a shoot. How about that?
Right. I mean, it's funny you use the term that they were your wrestlers. And I remember having a talk once with Arn Anderson and him talking about, like, going to towns like Fayetteville, North Carolina. And even though he wasn't making as much money as he later did, there was this satisfaction in being their wrestlers. He was, a Southern boy, and he felt this connection with the fans, and they were his fans, and he was one of their wrestlers.
Exactly.
There really was that, that chemistry, and it was a motivating factor, he said, to work even harder.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's a shame that Pat Patterson will never talk a lot about his connection with the San Francisco fans, but his fans at the Cow Palace, I've never seen to this day, except on TV, of course, but live, a connection. Maybe The Rock has it with the fans, but Patterson, the fans lived and breathed with Pat at the Cow Palace. Just amazing. The Go, Pat, Go chant would just echo the building. And my dad would be waiting sometimes in the car out in front sleeping. He'd hear it. He goes, yeah, I heard him cheer for Pat, It just
that's really something.
Amazing, And as I got a question. As a writer, for the biographies you've done, how did you bring up different territories when it was the WWE that was promoting the book or basically funding it? How did you skirt that issue of bringing up, them wrestling in territories that had no control by Vince Sr. or Vince Jr.?
It was a good time to be working on those books because I was given, I remember JR was the head of talent relations, and he was very accessible. And I wrote for the WWF magazine every month. I wrote for, first it was the WWF magazine when I started in 85. Then there was, Raw magazine, then there were eventually Raw and SmackDown magazines. And then there were also these specials called Spotlights. And at that time, they took the publications very seriously. And we were able to reach out to JR and ask him questions like that.
Gotcha.
And JR would decree, hey, it's okay. You can talk about any of the territories. And I remember even talking to Vince McMahon, and Vince McMahon saying, we are the caretakers of history. So I was allowed to convey that history. And that was, of course, one of the most satisfying parts of doing those books.
God, I'm in awe right now. You are showing me a side of Vince I really am just now starting to understand. I used to be a little bit anti-Vince in some of my past podcasts, but I've turned it around and really looked behind the press that he gets. And it's good that you said that, because there's so much history, and that's why I wanted you on my show, Keith, because when I met you, I bonded right away with your love for the sport, but just that you and I would look at for UHF stations again, we could touch back on that. I did the same thing you did, the same thing Jim Cornette did, just to find, I figured, there's Roy Shires, there's Portland, there's L.A. Well, there's a whole rest of the United States. There has to be other wrestling. And then from the wrestling books I get, wrestling magazines, I knew they existed. I had to see them. Like I was going to ask, did you ever see the Detroit promotion when you were growing up?
Not until years later. Not until maybe even it was the era of the internet. But no, I couldn't get access. We did get in 1976, we did get that Renegade promotion, the IWA, which was run by Eddie Einhorn.
Right.
So there was a period where we were getting the standard, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. We were getting on one of the Spanish stations. We were getting LaBelle's promotion.
Right.
We were getting New York and L.A. There was a station out on Long Island that at some point began showing Florida wrestling. So I could get that occasionally. But I also had grandparents who ended up moving to Florida. And I remember there were two stations on Saturday that would show Florida wrestling. One was the Current show, and then there was another station that was a week behind. But I wanted to watch that as well because I wasn't exposed to that, so I wanted to see both weeks. And usually I was only in Florida a week. And then, like you mentioned, going to wrestling when you would be in Oregon, my grandfather and I and one of my uncles usually would go to Miami Beach Convention Hall, and that was the high point of my trip to Florida.
Wow.
But then then in 76 there was the IWA,
right.
And they tried to, I guess, make a run against, I think it was the WWF, and even down in, like, Georgia, they had some shows, and maybe even in the Carolinas. And their champion was Bill Moscadis.
Right.
And they had Ernie Ladd was there, Bulldog Brower was there.
The Love Brothers, yes. Keith, we got that tape too. Yes. We got and Crybaby Cannon was at the end of his career. Eric the Red, and their lead announcer actually ended his career with
Jack Reynolds.
Right, Jack. You know more than me, man. You should be hosting. Yes, he ended his career at WWE or FF. And, we had those tapes for a while on some station, and exactly like me. When you went into a new area, or visiting, or somebody out of town, or relatives, the first thing, would you turn the TV on and look for wrestling, or ask them, hey, do you know of any wrestling shows, or look at the TV guide? Because that's what I would do.
I would. I had an uncle in Allentown, Pennsylvania, who owned like a grocery store, and I remember he lived in the back of the grocery store, and I remember us driving down to Pennsylvania to visit him, and immediately going into the newspaper and looking up the TV listings for the time I'd be there to see, if there was a wrestling show on there, and if it was going to be different than the wrestling I could see in New York.
We are blood brothers on that. We are eternal twins. I did the same exact thing, to the point where my parents would use that as a punishment and keep me from watching TV, because that's the only thing that could get through my head.
Right, and I actually tell a story, and, this is not the first time I've told this story, but I remember when I was a kid, my mother punished me for some reason and said I couldn't watch wrestling that week. And it was LA wrestling that I couldn't watch. And at one point during the broadcast, my mother was a bit of a fan too. So I said, I just want to turn it on and see if we're missing anything. When I did, I remember the Great Goliath was wrestling. She and I started watching it together, and then we just watched the rest of the program.
That's a great story. That is just a great story. I think I mentioned to you that with my mom, she fell in love with Dutch Savage, and she loved roller derby. So wrestling would almost always follow roller derby way back when, and she never wanted any part of wrestling until one day she came in the front room to do something. I don't know. I remember she was dusting the Venetian blinds, and Dutch Savage was on ranting and raving about what he was going to do to Pat Patterson, which is right before Moondog Lonnie Main came in to the territory. But she goes, "Who is that handsome man?" And I just went off. "That's Dutch Savage. He's fighting, Pat Patterson at the Cow Palace this Saturday, Mom. You want to go?" She goes, "Where's your father's binoculars?" Because anyway, I go, I'll find them right after the show. And she goes, "If you find the binoculars, we could go." So I found the binoculars. So she started.
Wow.
That was.
Did you go to roller derby as well?
You're not going to like what I'm going to tell you, yes, but I was so young, I don't really remember anything other than three names and one grudge match. I guess you'd call it a grudge match. I remember Charlie O'Connor, Joni Weston.
Charlie O'Connell.
Yeah, Charlie O'Connell, Joni Weston. Oh, and I forgot the Madonna of roller derby. And yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of her death. She'd dye her hair all the time.
Ann Cavello.
Yeah, God, you are an expert. You are the man right now. Yes, Ann Calvello.
But there was very much a connection between wrestling and roller derby.
Oh my God, yes. Oh, well, we got the tapes of the LA Thunderbirds up here, and that was a direct. They had women. They had like a 200-pound woman do a big splash on John Hall.
Green Ryan. She wore 747.
Yes. Is there anything you don't know, Keith? My God, yes. And I'd watched that and just marveled, God, why can't we have that up here? They never came to San Francisco. But John Hall, Ralphie Valadares, well, maybe, I don't know if Ralphie was involved back then with it, but damn, yeah. I did watch roller derby a little bit, and I did meet one time at the nude beach here in San Francisco at Baker Beach during that period of my life in the 80s. I met Ann Calvello. Very built, very muscular, very tanned woman. Very nice.
Boy.
Very nice woman.
Boy.
She goes, "You want my autograph?" I go, "No, I just want to look at you and talk to you." She laughed. Yeah, she, interesting woman. But back to wrestling. I mean, God, Keith, you're the first person I've met that had the same, as soon as you went into a new town, "Where's the TV guide? You got wrestling? Do you watch wrestling? Have you seen wrestling?" That I'd ask my aunt that, and friends of my parents, when they'd take me visiting. But you were lucky to see the WWF, which I never saw any of except on YouTube. Where I bet you remember when Stan Stasiak was champion, Pedro Morales.
Yes, I do. Yes.
So, like yourself, I grew up like with Roy Shire, with basically Roy Shire's wrestling first. Then we discovered LaBelle, and then Portland. And then at the end of Roy Shire's, I think Rock Rims would know more than me. But we had a succession of like 4 different wrestling shows in its place. Leo Mavia's wrestling, Hawaiian wrestling, Bulldog Brown, I guess Bob Geigel's promotion. And then we had the Macho Man's father, Angelo Popo's promotion. We had that for a while, just on TV tapings. And then we had Florida. So we had 4 try to take the place of Roy Shire.
Would they be simultaneous?
No, it was just like for a couple of weeks. The Channel 44, it was 44 or 20, I forgot which, would show the tapes. And we all thought that it was taking the place of Roy Shire's at the Cow Palace. Well, the only 2 shows, the only promotions that did shows, I might be mixed up on this. There might have been a third one. The third one would have been Blackjack Mulligan and Dick Murdoch's promotion that came here for like 2 matches, and that was it. The Florida promotion came here, and Dusty Rhodes closed out the wrestling at the Cow Palace, the NWA wrestling, by winning the U.S. Championship from Dick Slater. They came, and that was the end of that. But once Roy shut down...
And was Shire involved at the time, or that was after...
He shut down.
Had divested?
Yeah, he had divested. And then AWA came in, and then WWE, or WWF, and then WCW. But I can answer any question you got of Portland or Roy Shires. I mean, we were, like you, we were gifted, because you grew up on a promotion, back east, and so did I. That's when wrestling, I enjoyed it better. Let me just say that.
Well, of course, but then you always, glorify the wrestling you watch when you're an adolescent or pre-adolescent.
Yes, you're right.
And, I meet people now who say, oh, I remember the golden age of wrestling, the days when it was Stone Cold Steve Austin, because they're in their 30s, and the wrestling they watched when they were 12 or 13 years old. Because by that point, I was, an adult with a family.
Right.
I was, so I enjoyed that wrestling immensely, and I was very happy to be working for WWE during that period because it was very exciting.
Oh, I bet.
Different than when I talk about watching Bruno Sammartino or Pedro Morales wrestle in Madison Square Garden.
Damn, now you never told me you saw Morales wrestle at the Garden. Wow.
Yes. Yeah, I saw him wrestle, and I was just telling my daughter this the other night because she was asking me about the whereabouts of Cesaro, and she was talking about his giant swing. And I told her the story, she's in 6th grade. I told her the story about watching, John Leo Jonathan give his Mormon swing to Pedro Morales in Madison Square Garden.
Awesome. Another underrated wrestler who should be in the Hall of Fame if there is a real one, John Leo Jonathan.
That's true about Don Leo Jonathan. And when I was, a few years ago, I was talking to Greg Oliver, the Canadian wrestling author, and we were just chatting like it's two wrestling fans. And he said, who's the one wrestler you never met and always wanted to meet? And I said, Don Leo Jonathan.
Wow, a treasure. Roddy Piper had nothing but praise just about him. Of course, Roddy had praise for everybody, but definitely went out of his way to praise him. The man stood toe-to-toe with Andre the Giant, all sorts of guys, Gene Kiniski, Killer Kowalski, and went to every territory, He was in L.A. He did go to Shires, though.
He did not go to Shires.
No, but he went to Portland.
I wonder why that was.
Well, Shires, I was talking to Alan Bolte, the ring announcer, who's been on my show, and is a great guy. Gee, I wish I could hook you two up. Have you ever talked to him?
God, I'd love to.
I'll, definitely hook you up on Facebook. I'll write him and tell him. Because he's entering a stage where he loves talking about wrestling more so than ever now, because he misses it. It's nostalgia, for him, because he doesn't do any announcing except for independent shows every once in a while. But he told me that Shires shied away from a lot of big-name talent just because of the money, because they'd want bigger money, like Bruiser Brody. I think he brought he brought Jonathan in the 60s and early 70s, but not towards the end of the promotion. He quit using him. He did bring him in, but he didn't have him as the U.S. champ or a tag champ. He just have him as filler.
When you say the end of the promotion, now Shires shut down in 81?
Right around there. I might be mistaken. 81. Yeah, 81. I think Bob Roop and Bastien were the last two bookers, if I'm not mistaken.
So Bob Roop and Red Bastien. So who was, when you say the end of the promotion, what year would that have started?
I would say, I got out of the service in 79, came back after Mount St. Helens. I would say 81. I'm really bad dyslexic at numbers, so I would say 81.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and I guess at that point, and that was around the time, I guess, LaBelle was starting. He didn't go out of business yet.
No, he didn't.
It was definitely on the decline.
Right.
Piper was there until when? Also like 81 or
81, yeah.
Down to Charlotte.
Right. Well, the way Piper was, he stayed in L.A., came up to San Francisco, went back to L.A. and forth from San Francisco, and he was here during the end of Shire's run as promoter, and he held the tag titles, if I'm not mistaken, for a week, maybe 2 weeks with Ed Wiskowski, and then the place shut down, and then he went to L.A. and then up to Portland, and the rest is history. Buddy Rose brought him up there, and then to Charlotte, and the rest is history. And you could, I'm sure you watched the YouTube videos of his interviews fighting Moondog Mayne, and then the same week.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody's watched those. They're amazing. They are just amazing. You knew right then and there Roddy was going to hit big time. It was just a matter of when. He was.
Right.
We used to say as teenagers, he's too good to be here. He's just.
So you were aware that he was outshining the others in the promotion.
Yes, my friend Kevin Strong said that, and Kevin wasn't as big a wrestling fan as me, but we were both paper boys and would talk about the matches the Sunday morning, when we deliver the Sunday paper, and he said, Roddy Piper's just too good to be here. And I go, you're right. He's just too good,
Wow.
And that was when we discovered that wrestling, wasn't 100% real. Because on Wednesday, he'd be teaming with Lonnie down in L.A., and then on Saturday, he'd be fighting him on TV at the Cow Palace. Not on TV, but, they'd be promoting his match against him at the Cow Palace with Lonnie.
Right, and that's interesting because a guy like Shires was such a kayfabe guy, and it must have killed him to know that television signal was getting all the way up to San Francisco and smartening up the fans.
Right. Oh, I bet it did. Rock Rims is coming out with a book on California wrestling, and I think he has a whole chapter about that era. But we've talked about it off the air, and he said the same thing you did. It must have just killed him, and because he had everything lined up, it was too late to stop it. And Lonnie and Roddy just did these promos that are just amazing. They carry today the same weight that they did when they first came on. I could watch it over and over and over again. And, when Kevin and I were talking, it was like, now, wait a minute. They're both bad guys in L.A. Roddy's a bad guy here, but Lonnie's a good guy here. We just finally, it dawned on us, and it kind of hurt us a little bit because it was like make-believe almost, until we realized, what it was. But we still went, we still followed the wrestling magazines and everything. It didn't stop us. It just kind of, go ahead.
No, I mean, I guess when you say that, it's almost like, what's that term about, for those who believe no explanation is necessary.
Right.
For those who don't, no explanation is sufficient. But, no explanation was necessary. You were a believer at that point. Not a believer, but wanted to believe.
Exactly. And the very next card we went to was, the Moondogs fight with Roddy at the Cow Palace for the title. And Kevin and I were laughing at all these people. They don't know what we know, that they tag up together in L.A., I didn't hear people saying, Roddy's going to beat him up. Roddy really hates him. They really are enemies. And Kevin and I were just laughing, because they didn't know.
You felt smart.
Yes,
in
exactly.
Reality, they had access to the same television show you did if they had gotten around to discovering it.
Right. And it's funny you should mention that because Wednesday, I looked forward to watching LaBelle's promotion more than Shire's because at that point in time, Patterson was gone, Lonnie was coming in and out, Piper was there, Chavo was on the undercard. I could see the same wrestlers Shire brought in basically on Wednesday nights in different personas, because, Moondog was a good guy, Roddy was a bad guy, but it was so different in L.A. And plus, you had Gene LaBelle doing the interviews versus Hank Renner, and not to take anything away from Hank Renner, but Gene was just amazing. Renner was just a stooge for the good guy, for the good guys. I'm going to go back to the dressing room and I'm going to tell Lonnie what you said, but Gene,
funny.
Gene would just react, his facial expressions. There's one interview which you've probably seen a lot, is when superstar Graham came to L.A., and one of the things to piss Chavo off, Superstar would spit on him in the ring all the time. Well, Chavo said to Gene LaBelle, I'm going to do something that you don't like. And he spit in Gene's face, during the interview. It's on YouTube. And, in real life, Gene would have taken apart Chavo at that point in time in a New York second. I don't think there's anybody up the face of, well, maybe there would be, but there wasn't too many people at that time that could take Gene. I love Gene LaBelle. I can't,
Right. Yeah, and Gene LaBelle, have you read his book?
No, I have four books. One of my close friends is Noelle Kim, who ghost wrote one of his books. And she's one of the administrators on Roddy Piper Rocks on Facebook. She was his manager for a while. And I have the books. I'm saving them, But no, I haven't read it yet.
Now, that would be a guy to sit down with and hear his stories.
Oh, wouldn't it? I mean, let alone wrestling. But, he brought, for the people that don't know, my own opinion is he brought legitimacy to the sport of jiu-jitsu and probably is the godfather of MMA. His fight against, I think it's Milo, I keep forgetting the boxer's name now. You know. The fight he had against the boxer, wrestler against boxer, or jiu-jitsu against boxer, and Gene won, even though they dipped the guy's gloves in water and let him dry. And
I didn't know that story.
Oh, God, look it up. Just Wikipedia Gene LaBelle, you'll see it. I think it's Milo Savage. No relation to Randy. But he fights him in the 60s. And, just look it up. You do yourself a favor.
I will.
It's not as good as the Steve Seagal story, which everybody knows
that.
Yes,
of course.
Yeah, we don't even have to tell that story. Gene LaBelle, the announcing he would do. And when I met him at Roddy's memorial, I sat with him for like 3 minutes, and his wife is very protective of his time. She said, now, you got to scoot along now, after we talked for a bit. But I had him recite the Richmond 9, 5171, and he went into the whole song and dance, Keith. It was great. Tickets only $5.50, children only $3.50, And amazing man. And let me tell you, at 80 years old, when he shakes your hand, he could break it still. There's no doubt about it.
Well, that's really exciting. See, we would get Spanish language wrestling in New York. So Gene LaBelle was not the primary announcer. Occasionally, he would do an interview in English with one of the English-speaking wrestlers.
That's exactly what we got. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So you got Luis Magana and Miguel Alonso.
Yes, we got the same thing you did, and I would pay attention to the Spanish, but I would love it when Gene LaBelle came on because I'd understood, And Jeff Walton towards the end. Have you read his book?
I have.
Yeah, it's a great read. Richmond 9, 5171, My Memories or whatever. Great book.
Yes. Yeah, and when I was working for WWE, when I was on retainer for them, one of my thrills was befriending Miguel Alonso, the Spanish announcer.
Wow.
And I remember there was like a road trip where it was myself, Lanny Poffo, and Miguel Alonso all in a car together, and I was just listening to their respective tales and thinking, I'm sure there are better things in life than this, but I can't imagine it right now.
I mean, look, from where I'm sitting to where you're sitting, any of the stories you've told me are fantastic. I mean, just being backstage at an event and walking down the hall, there's Superstar Graham, there's Stone Cold, there's Vince, there's Shane, You have to tell me an Andre the Giant story. You must have one.
Well, my only Andre the Giant story that jumps out at me is I remember Andre would sit generally in the last row of first class because that was the largest seat apparently. And one time we were sitting next to each other on a plane, and it was when The Princess Bride came out. And Andre was very angry because Playboy magazine had done a review of The Princess Bride, and they didn't mention him.
Oh.
And he said, they mentioned everyone except me. Why? And I said, I don't know. And he said, but you're a writer. I said, we're not all like, we don't all like consult with each other before we write our stories. I don't know why, Andre. And Andre looked at me, a little bit disgusted, and then kind of just dropped it.
Wow.
But I had spent a lot of time talking to Andre, sitting in bars with Andre, and as I'm sure you've heard, there was a loneliness to him, and but then I could see him being very kind to certain folks. He was very protective backstage. I remember one time a bunch of fans coming in who were elderly. For some reason they were in the dressing room, and Andre screamed at them, "Out! Out!" And of course they were terrified. When they left, Andre turned around to the rest of the dressing room and smiled.
That's great. Wow. So you must be privy to some really inside stuff over the years.
Not as much as some others. I was more of a spectator than, an insider, because I never worked full-time for WWE. I was always on retainer for them. So I was only on the road usually around once a month or so. But being on the road once a month, you would see stuff, hear stuff, and I also got to meet some people who really excited me. I remember being backstage in Texas one night, and both Johnny Valentine and Mad Dog Vachon being there.
Wow.
Both of them were, I think Mad Dog Vachon had a prosthetic leg, and Johnny Valentine couldn't walk because of that plane crash.
Right.
Kind of watching them both, resting their canes down and just, spending time with each other. And me just being exciting to be standing inches away from the two of them.
Man, I just would have sat there and became a fly on the wall. My God, amazing stories for those two guys.
Yeah. I do need to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Got you. Can I get 5 more minutes of you?
Sure, yes.
Great. Okay, I'll do it at 45. We're looking at 43 minutes. So just 3 more minutes. I sure appreciate your time, Keith. I'd love to have you on again. We could talk more old school. I'm talking to Keith Elliot Greenberg, author of wrestling magazines, and right now he's not an author to me. He's an historian and somebody I've bonded with because we both love wrestling and love it the way it should be loved. I guess I'll end the show with asking you, how about a Roddy story? Anything about Roddy Piper live in person?
I didn't have that special moment with Roddy myself, but interestingly, when they tried to revive Portland wrestling a few years back,
right?
My brother-in-law, who's a sales guy at one of the Portland television stations, was involved in that just coincidentally. And he got to know Roddy fairly well, and they would actually have very personal conversations about his family and about life. And Roddy would talk about, what the fans meant to him. And, my brother-in-law was surprised because, he's just a regular guy. And he felt he caught Roddy Piper at a moment in his life when he just felt like opening up.
Amazing.
Saw a very human and caring side to him.
Gotcha. Well, that sounds great. I mean, that just sitting there wondering what he talked about is intriguing. But the one last thing before you go, I ask all my guests, what's your favorite wrestling moment? The first thing that comes to your mind that just illustrates wrestling. This is wrestling for me in my mind. Your all-time moment.
Boy, that's really a difficult question. But maybe it would be Bruno Sammartino winning the championship from Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, even though I didn't witness that. Had I been there in Madison Square Garden, I've seen the photos so many times.
Right, we all have of him in the bear hug, right.
And I imagine that was the beginning of something brand new. And, I'm sure that would have been an incredible
much.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Keith. I'd love to have you on again, and thank you just so much for coming on my show. And it's been great. I'm glad that there's someone out there like myself that appreciates old school. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred, and it's a pleasure being on your show, and I hope to speak to you and be on the show again soon.
You will, and I'll send you the link tomorrow.
Okay,
and,
great.
Can you send me a picture of yourself on Facebook? Because I'll need it for the
Sure,
show.
actually, just use the picture of me. That's my profile picture.
You got it. Thanks a lot, Keith.
Okay.
God bless your family, and stay safe out there.
Thank you, buddy.
You got it. Bye-bye. I've been talking to Keith Elliot Greenberg, author of wrestling biographies of Ric Flair, superstar Billy Graham, and classy Freddie Blassie. Thank you, everybody out there. And remember, tune in to Derfcast on SoundCloud.com, Facebook, Derfcast Capitals, and Comfortably Zoned Radio Network on iTunes, Ralph Tycho's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. It's that time, folks, where we say goodbye. This has been Derfcast, episode 40, here recorded in the inner sunset of San Francisco, California. I want to thank Keith Elliot Greenberg as my guest this week. I want to thank Pipes, the cat, the engineer, and I want to thank Max, the security guard that's kept all the flies out of the room. People, remember, stand up to bullies. It's that easy.